You think you can break me? The words, sharp and incredulous, cut through the murmurs of the crowd gathered in the grand hall of the Northern Territories pack. Torches flickered along the stone walls, casting long, dancing shadows that trembled across the faces of the assembled wolves in human form. Lila Monroe knelt on the cold, polished floor, her hands pressed against the marble as though holding herself upright from toppling under the weight of every mocking gaze. Her dress, once a deep emerald green, now hung in tatters at the hem, frayed from the careless jostling and pushed aside by the more privileged Omega sisters who circled her like hawks. The air smelled faintly of pine from the torches, mingling with the crisp scent of autumn outside the high, arched windows, and every breath Lila drew felt heavy, as if she were inhaling the contempt of everyone present. Whispers rippled across the hall, punctuated by occasional laughter that seemed to echo like thunder in her chest, a constant reminder that she was the rejected one, the Omega that everyone had agreed to overlook, dismiss, and shame. Her stomach churned and her palms were clammy, but she forced herself to lift her gaze just enough to meet the flickering torchlight across the room, catching the glimmer of eyes that held curiosity, scorn, and fleeting recognition. She could see the alpha and beta witnesses of the pack observing her with the detached assessment of those who measured every heartbeat, every posture, every tremor of emotion, and yet, no one moved to help, to soften the blow of public ridicule. Her heart pounded, a steady drum of anxiety and determination intertwined, and she felt the faint whisper of her wolf stirring within, a reminder that even as an Omega scorned, there was a strength still slumbering in her. A tray of ceremonial chalices rattled as a nervous beta stepped near, and the soft clink of metal on stone drew all eyes for a moment to the edge of the dais where the pack leader had not yet arrived, yet his presence was felt even in absence. Lila adjusted the shawl draped over her shoulders, a threadbare thing meant more for warmth than appearance, and reminded herself that submission was expected, but surrender was her choice alone. She inhaled slowly, letting the cool air of the hall settle in her lungs, steadying herself against the heat of humiliation washing over her, every laugh and pointed finger a wave she could not escape. Then, a shift in the energy of the room made her freeze, a subtle movement at the end of the hall, a figure stepping into the torchlight that seemed to stretch taller, broader than any wolf present. The crowd's whispers faltered, a pause in the rhythm of scorn, and all attention was drawn to the commanding presence that entered. Darius Blackwell moved with deliberate grace, the long coat he wore flowing behind him as though it had its own will, his shoulders squared, his gaze locking with Lila's in a moment that stretched and thinned the air between them. She felt a jolt, a tremor of recognition that was neither fear nor relief, but a tension that tightened her chest and pulled her attention fully to him. The laughter of the crowd died, replaced by a charged silence as he walked forward, each step measured, resonant, carrying authority and quiet power that made the mockers falter, their amusement fading under the weight of his scrutiny. Lila's breath caught in her throat, her knees aching from prolonged kneeling, yet her hands remained clenched against the cold floor, grounding herself as her pulse raced in tandem with the approaching footsteps. Every flicker of torchlight seemed to highlight his presence, casting angular shadows across his strong jaw, high cheekbones, and eyes that glimmered like polished silver in the dim glow. Her own eyes widened as she noted the subtle confidence in his movement, the way he held his head high as if the room itself had bent to his will, and she realized in that instant that her humiliation was about to pivot, that the tide of judgment would soon reverse. The air vibrated with expectation, a sensation almost tactile, like the pressure before a storm, and she felt the collective gaze of the pack focus entirely on the two of them, a current pulling her into a space where only dignity and courage mattered. Lila lifted her chin, however slightly, refusing to let her body language betray the fear she had swallowed for so long. And in the pause before Darius spoke, she sensed the subtle shift within herself, the awakening of a self-respect that had lain dormant beneath years of scorn and quiet endurance. He stopped a few paces away, his gaze locking fully onto hers, and in that moment, the ambient noise of the hall seemed to fade to a distant murmur. Lila felt an unfamiliar steadiness, a quiet determination rooted in the awareness that she had not only survived the cruelty, but had preserved her integrity. And then, with a voice measured and resonant enough to command attention without raising it, Darius Blackwell spoke her name, and in that single utterance, the hall seemed to realign, the laughter stilled, and the currents of authority shifted, signaling that the humiliation was ending, and recognition, something far greater, was beginning. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. If you believe that kindness is power, hit like and subscribe. These stories remind us, love redeems the broken. Now, back to Lila Monroe. The crowd had fallen into a hushed anticipation, the echoes of their previous laughter still lingering faintly against the stone walls, and Lila Monroe felt the shift in energy ripple through the hall like a subtle current brushing against her skin. Her knees ached from prolonged kneeling, yet she remained rooted to the spot, observing the reaction of every pair of eyes as they followed Darius Blackwell with an intensity that seemed to weigh upon the entire room. The torches along the walls flickered with renewed vigor, casting elongated shadows that danced across the intricate tapestries depicting centuries of pack history, the golden threads catching the light in a way that made the past seem alive, watching the unfolding moment with her. Lila could hear the soft murmurs of astonishment ripple through the audience, a sharp contrast to the earlier snickers, and she allowed herself a subtle exhale, steadying her heartbeat as she drew in the cool autumn air filtering through the high, arched windows. Each breath she took seemed to reinforce the small measure of control she now had, a realization that she was not entirely at the mercy of those who had mocked her moments ago. Her gaze met that of Darius, silver eyes like polished steel reflecting a calm authority, and she sensed in him a deliberate patience, a measured assessment of her courage and dignity. She felt an unfamiliar warmth rise within her chest, not from the proximity of his presence alone, but from the acknowledgement that she had been seen, truly seen, beyond the surface judgments of the crowd. The tension that had bound her shoulders seemed to loosen imperceptibly, the strain of fear giving way to a cautious clarity as she straightened her spine, feeling the subtle support of her own inner resolve. Every flicker of movement around the hall, every whisper, and every sidelong glance seemed to slow, the rhythm of time bending slightly around the charged silence that now enveloped them. Darius stepped forward with deliberate calm, each movement precise, commanding the space without force, and Lila could not help but notice the subtle shift in posture among the observing pack. The once bold critics hesitated, their confidence faltering under the gravity of his presence. The torches seemed to illuminate his form in a halo of quiet authority, highlighting the angular lines of his face, the strength in his stance, and the unwavering focus in his gaze. Lila felt an instinctive pull, a magnetic force that seemed to connect them across the room, anchoring her attention and grounding her scattered thoughts. As he paused, just a few feet away, the silence deepened, almost tangible, pressing gently against her senses, and she became aware of the subtle sounds of her own breathing, the steady rise and fall of her chest, and the faint rustle of fabric as she adjusted her posture to meet the moment with as much dignity as she could muster. Around them, the hall felt suspended in a delicate equilibrium, the collective awareness of the pack attuned to the unfolding interaction, waiting for the next signal, the next movement that would define the outcome of this charged encounter. Lila allowed herself a measured blink, the briefest acknowledgement of her own vulnerability, coupled with the realization of her resilience. And as Darius lifted his head slightly, the light catching the depth of his silver eyes, she felt an unspoken communication pass between them, a recognition of mutual understanding and a shared acknowledgement of courage. The murmurs of the crowd began to transform into whispers of speculation, their earlier derision replaced by cautious curiosity, and Lila noted the subtle stiffening of those who had previously jeered, the slight tilt of heads, and the careful placement of hands at their sides as they reassessed the moment. The weight of observation no longer felt oppressive but instead imbued her with a quiet strength, an understanding that her endurance and composure had commanded attention and respect in a way that mere words could not achieve. She drew in a slow, steadying breath, feeling the coolness of the hall settle into her lungs, and the soft tension in her shoulders begin to ease as the awareness of the shift in energy around her took hold. Darius took a measured step closer, his presence commanding yet non-threatening. And in that subtle motion, Lila sensed the unspoken promise of support and acknowledgement, a tether of connection that had transformed the energy of the entire hall from one of mockery to one of attentive respect. Every detail, from the flickering light on the stone floor to the soft murmurs that now threaded through the audience, became part of a tapestry in which she was no longer merely the subject of scorn, but a participant in a moment of recognition and emerging dignity. Her hands, previously pressed against the cold marble for reassurance, relaxed slightly, and she felt the faint, grounding pulse of her own heartbeat, the rhythm steadying with each passing second. The room seemed to stretch, the boundaries of space and attention bending to focus entirely on the silent exchange of presence and intent, and Lila understood, with a clarity that surprised her, that the unfolding moment was not about fear or judgment, but about the emergence of her own agency, the quiet assertion of self in the midst of scrutiny. Every subtle shift, every nuanced gesture, every measured breath formed a delicate dance of attention and awareness, drawing the hall into a collective suspense that was both palpable and transformative. She allowed her gaze to meet Darius once more, feeling the tether of acknowledgement solidify, a silent affirmation that her poise and courage had not gone unnoticed, and that the course of events was tilting toward a resolution she had not dared to hope for, yet now felt quietly within reach. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. If you believe that kindness is power, hit like and subscribe. These stories remind us, love redeems the broken. Now, back to Lila Monroe. The hall remained suspended in a tense stillness as Lila Monroe felt the eyes of every pack member upon her, their whispers fading into a low hum, almost imperceptible beneath the commanding presence of Darius Blackwell. The torches flickered, sending wavering patterns of light across the vaulted ceiling and illuminating the polished stone floor where shadows stretched and twisted with the movement of the crowd. Lila shifted slightly on her knees, the chill of the marble seeping through her thin dress, yet a newfound steadiness coursed through her, born from the silent acknowledgement that she was no longer invisible, that her endurance and composure had drawn attention from someone whose authority surpassed all others in the hall. Darius moved with deliberate, measured steps, each motion commanding respect without raising his voice, and the subtle cadence of his approach seemed to pull the room into a collective breath, as if the entire audience were holding on to the moment with suspended anticipation. Lila's chest rose and fell in rhythm with her heartbeat, a steady drum of nervous energy mingled with cautious relief, and she sensed the faint warmth of confidence blooming in her veins as the intensity of observation settled upon her shoulders without the weight of fear she had carried moments before. Her hands, previously clutching the edges of her tattered dress for reassurance, now rested lightly against the cool floor, fingertips tracing the smooth surface as though grounding herself to the solid reality of the hall, a tangible reminder that she had endured the scrutiny and humiliation to reach this precise point. The subtle rustle of movement in the crowd drew her gaze outward, revealing the tentative shifts of the pack members who had earlier jeered. Their expressions now were mixed with uncertainty and restrained curiosity, the abrupt change in atmosphere rendering them silent observers to the quiet assertion of dignity she now embodied. Lila lifted her chin, just slightly, feeling the cool air brush against her face, and met the unwavering gaze of Darius Blackwell, whose eyes, sharp and reflective like polished silver, seemed to assess not only her composure but the depth of her resilience, the hidden strength that had kept her upright despite the magnitude of public humiliation. The torchlight caught the angles of his face, accentuating the calm authority in his expression, the firmness of his jaw, and the subtle, controlled movement of his shoulders as he stepped closer, bridging the gap between them with a presence that seemed to command the attention of every observer without force or intimidation. Lila felt an instinctive draw toward the measured confidence emanating from him, a silent reassurance that the balance of the room had shifted, that the derision she had endured was giving way to recognition and unspoken respect. The tension in the hall was almost tangible, a weight pressing gently against her awareness, and she became acutely conscious of the subtle sounds surrounding her. The soft murmur of voices held in check, the flicker of the torches, the distant echo of footsteps, and the faint stir of her own controlled breathing, each detail magnifying the importance of the unfolding moment. As Darius paused a mere few feet away, the silence stretched, palpable and dense, the collective attention of the pack centering entirely on the two of them. And in that suspended space, Lila felt the quiet surge of empowerment, a sense of being seen and validated in the most profound way, her earlier vulnerability transforming into a measured strength that radiated outward. The careful shift in posture, the subtle rise of her chest, and the steadying of her gaze became a declaration, an unspoken assertion of presence and worth, amplified by the commanding aura of Darius, whose deliberate calmness contrasted with the residual tension of the hall. Every detail of the environment, the flickering light, the murmuring crowd, the cool marble beneath her hands, coalesced into a tableau in which Lila was no longer the subject of mockery, but a figure acknowledged for her courage and dignity. She allowed herself a slow, deliberate inhalation, filling her lungs with the crisp air of the hall, grounding herself in the quiet authority now surrounding her, and felt a subtle, affirming pulse of confidence that had been absent only moments before. The hall seemed to adjust around this new dynamic, a quiet realignment in which the observers, the space, and the presence of Darius formed a tableau of anticipation, respect, and latent recognition, drawing Lila into a suspended, yet transformative experience where composure and resilience became the defining narrative. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. If you believe that kindness is power, hit like and subscribe. These stories remind us, love redeems the broken. Now, back to Lila Monroe. The soft glow of the torches cast intricate patterns across the stone floor as Lila Monroe rose to her feet, her movements careful and deliberate, each step a quiet assertion of composure amidst the charged atmosphere of the hall. Her heart still raced from the intensity of Darius Blackwell's presence, yet there was a grounding steadiness that had begun to take root within her, a recognition that she was not merely a passive participant in the unfolding events, but an active presence whose resilience could not be dismissed. The murmurs of the pack had shifted, a low, cautious hum replacing the earlier laughter, and Lila could feel the subtle attention of every onlooker, their gazes assessing, weighing, and ultimately acknowledging her dignity. She drew a slow, measured breath, feeling the chill of the hall brush against her exposed arms, and the gentle rustle of her dress as it moved with her reminded her of the physical reality anchoring the moment, a tactile confirmation of her agency in a situation where she had previously felt powerless. Darius remained a few steps away, his gaze unwavering, the strength of his presence resonating through the space without a single word, and in that silent communication, Lila sensed both protection and recognition, a shared understanding that transcended the need for verbal affirmation. The hall itself seemed to respond, the torchlight dancing along the tapestries that depicted generations of pack history, casting their stories into motion as though the past were witnessing and approving the emergence of a new dynamic, a realignment of respect and attention. Lila's eyes swept across the room, noting the subtle shifts in posture and expression among the pack members who had once jeered, their confidence tempered by the undeniable authority radiating from Darius, and she felt a surge of quiet empowerment, an awareness that the endurance she had displayed was being recognized and valued. Her hands, now resting lightly at her sides, relaxed as the tension that had gripped her shoulders began to ease, and she allowed herself a brief moment of acknowledgement for the courage it had taken to maintain poise under scrutiny. The cool air of the hall, tinged with the scent of pine from the torches, filled her lungs, and with each measured breath, she felt a clarity and focus sharpening within her, a sense of alignment between her internal resolve and the external presence of authority that now supported her. Darius took a single step closer, deliberate yet unhurried, the weight of his movement commanding attention without the need for overt display, and Lila found herself instinctively straightening further, meeting his steady, silver-gray gaze with a composed awareness that her dignity remained intact. The subtle energy of the room had shifted entirely, the collective attention of the pack now concentrated on the interaction between them, every detail. The flicker of light, the gentle rustle of fabric, the barely audible shift of feet, heightened and amplified by the awareness of anticipation in the air. Lila felt a faint, comforting warmth as she sensed the unspoken communication bridging the space between her and Darius, a quiet acknowledgement that her presence and composure were both noticed and respected, and that the balance of power, though previously weighted against her, was now realigned in a way that honored her perseverance. The soft hum of whispered speculation from the edges of the crowd was tempered by the commanding stillness of Darius, creating a rhythm in which each observer became aware of the dignity inherent in her posture, the courage in her gaze, and the quiet assertion of her worth. Every small movement, the adjustment of her shoulders, the measured shift of her feet, the subtle tilting of her head, became a part of a larger tableau, a visual articulation of strength emerging from vulnerability, and Lila recognized the significance of this moment, not for the approval of others, but for the affirmation of her own presence and agency within the hall. The torches continued their steady flicker, the shadows stretching and bending with the contours of the room, and Lila allowed herself to acknowledge the faint rise of anticipation and respect that now filled the space, a transformation she had helped create simply by standing, breathing, and meeting the weight of attention with grace and quiet courage. The hall seemed to contract and expand around the moment, each breath, each glance, each heartbeat amplified into a shared experience, and Lila felt an unspoken promise of acknowledgement and support, a sense that the narrative of her presence was shifting in a way that neither ridicule nor doubt could unsettle. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. If you believe that kindness is power, hit like and subscribe. These stories remind us, love redeems the broken. Now, back to Lila Monroe. The hall had settled into a profound silence, a tension that was palpable yet strangely calm, as Lila Monroe allowed herself to rise fully from the kneeling position she had maintained for what felt like an eternity. Her muscles, stiff and cold from the marble floor, protested with each movement, but she straightened deliberately, drawing strength from the awareness that she was no longer subject to the judgment of the crowd alone. The torches flickered gently, casting an amber glow across her face and illuminating the subtle determination in her eyes, a determination born not of defiance, but of quiet resilience. Darius Blackwell remained a few paces away, his presence a steady anchor in the shifting energy of the room, and Lila could feel the unspoken assurance radiating from him, a signal that she could navigate this space with her dignity intact. The murmurs of the pack members, once loud and biting, had softened into hushed tones, their collective attention now absorbed by the interaction between her and the commanding alpha, and Lila sensed a subtle shift in their perception, an acknowledgement that her endurance and poise could not be ignored. She took a slow, measured breath, letting the cool air of the hall fill her lungs and settle her nerves, each exhale carrying away the lingering tension of earlier ridicule, leaving in its place a composed awareness of her own presence. Her gaze swept across the assembly, noting the slight inclinations of heads, the hesitant gestures, and the careful positioning of hands as the observers recalibrated their understanding of her status. And with each observation, Lila felt a quiet confidence bloom within her chest, a recognition of her own resilience and the power of self-possession. Darius stepped forward with measured grace, his movement deliberate yet unhurried, the weight of his authority felt in every subtle shift of his shoulders and the firm placement of his feet on the stone floor. The light from the torches caught the angles of his features, highlighting the strength of his jaw, the clarity in his silver-gray eyes, and the calm precision of his posture, all contributing to a presence that commanded attention without overt assertion. Lila felt an instinctive pull toward him, a tether of recognition and understanding that transcended words, grounding her in the reality that her composure and quiet courage were being met with acknowledgement and respect. The air in the hall seemed to thrum with anticipation, the ambient sound of the murmuring pack members blending with the faint flicker of torchlight and the soft echo of footsteps, creating an almost tangible rhythm that underscored the significance of the moment. Lila adjusted her stance slightly, feeling the smooth texture of the marble beneath her fingertips, The subtle rustle of her dress as it shifted with her movement, and the gentle warmth of her own steady heartbeat, a reminder that she was fully present and engaged in this pivotal encounter. Every small gesture, from the lift of her chin to the careful placement of her feet, contributed to the tableau of dignity she projected, a silent declaration that she was both aware of the scrutiny surrounding her and unshaken by it. The subtle interplay of light and shadow, the measured attention of the pack, and the commanding presence of Darius combined to create an environment in which respect and recognition could flourish, allowing Lila to inhabit the space fully and assert her quiet authority through poise and steadfast composure. As the moments stretched and the attention of the hall remained fixed upon her, she felt a calm certainty settle over her, a sense that her endurance and dignity had established a new equilibrium, one in which she was neither invisible nor diminished, but fully acknowledged and present, standing poised amidst the collective gaze of the pack. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. If you believe that kindness is power, hit like and subscribe. These stories remind us, love redeems the broken. Now, back to Lila Monroe. The air in the grand hall felt charged with a new energy as Lila Monroe took a cautious step forward, the smooth marble cool beneath her feet, and the flickering torchlight casting shifting patterns across the walls and ceiling. Every pair of eyes seemed to follow her movements, measuring, assessing, and absorbing the subtle assertion of confidence that had begun to radiate from her. Darius Blackwell remained just a few feet away, his posture unwavering, his silver-gray eyes holding steady on her as if anchoring the room in a current of calm authority. The murmurs of the crowd had softened into a background hum, replaced by a sense of expectation, a collective breath held as the assembly waited for the next motion, the next indication of intention from the two central figures. Lila adjusted the shawl draped across her shoulders, letting the fabric settle naturally as she straightened her back, feeling the subtle tremor of her own heartbeat as a reminder of both vulnerability and strength coexisting within her. The flicker of torchlight caught the angles of her face, illuminating the determination in her eyes, the gentle set of her jaw, and the steadying lift of her chin. She allowed herself a small, measured breath, inhaling the crisp air of the hall and letting it fill her lungs with a sense of grounding, a quiet acknowledgement of the presence she now commanded simply by standing and meeting the gaze of Darius with unflinching composure. His movements remained deliberate and controlled, the flow of his long coat and the cadence of his steps reinforcing a presence that was both commanding and steadying, creating a subtle rhythm in the hall that drew the attention and respect of the onlookers without the need for spoken words. Lila sensed the shift in perception around her, the subtle inclinations of heads, the slight tilts of bodies, and the hushed adjustments of posture among the pack members who had moments ago jeered and laughed, now attuned to the silent assertion of her dignity and the palpable influence of Darius's authority. Each step she took was measured, thoughtful, a reinforcement of her own agency, and she felt the warmth of quiet pride growing within her chest as she realized that endurance and composure could alter not only the perception of others, but also the rhythm of the room itself. The ambient sounds, the distant shuffle of feet, the faint whisper of fabric, and the soft crackle of torch flames, blended into a subtle symphony that underscored the charged stillness, heightening the awareness of each breath and each motion, allowing Lila to inhabit the space fully with a presence that was recognized and acknowledged. Darius's eyes, steady and commanding, conveyed reassurance without words, and she drew a sense of security from the unspoken communication between them, a tether of understanding and support that anchored her to the moment with quiet strength. The hall seemed to hold its collective breath as she allowed herself to feel the interplay of light and shadow, attention and recognition, tension and calm, absorbing it all into a focused awareness that expanded with each deliberate step she took. Her hands, previously clenched lightly at her sides for grounding, relaxed further, the coolness of the marble beneath her fingers a tangible reminder of her stability and presence. Every subtle shift of weight, the careful placement of each foot, the slight lift of her shoulders, and the conscious alignment of her gaze created a silent narrative that spoke of resilience, grace, and self-possession, commanding attention without a single word. The subtle currents of energy in the room seemed to bend around the quiet assertion of her authority, transforming the atmosphere from one of scrutiny and anticipation into a space where respect and acknowledgement flowed naturally. Lila felt a deepening calm within herself, a recognition that endurance, dignity, and quiet courage were forces that could shape perception, influence the room, and anchor her firmly in the narrative of the moment. The torchlight flickered gently across the hall as she continued forward, step by step, breath by breath, fully aware of her agency, fully present, and fully recognized in a room that had moments ago sought to diminish her, and yet now reflected her own quiet strength and the unspoken acknowledgement of her worth. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. If you believe that kindness is power, hit like and subscribe. These stories remind us, love redeems the broken. Now, back to Lila Monroe. The tension in the grand hall had reached a quiet peak, the flicker of torches casting a warm, undulating light across the polished stone floor, illuminating the faces of the pack members who now watched with a mix of curiosity, restraint, and growing respect. Lila Monroe stood tall, her shoulders squared and her chin lifted slightly, a subtle yet undeniable shift in her posture that spoke of steady confidence. Despite the lingering awareness of the scrutiny surrounding her, the room seemed to contract and expand with every measured breath, each inhalation filling her with calm determination and each exhalation releasing traces of lingering apprehension. Darius Blackwell remained poised a few feet away, his silver-gray eyes unwavering, scanning her with a depth of attention that suggested recognition beyond the superficial, a silent communication of acknowledgement and subtle encouragement. Lila felt the weight of the room settled differently now, the once tense anticipation transforming into an atmosphere where her composure and grace dictated the tempo, and the subtle movements of the pack mirrored her own, a ripple effect of quiet respect spreading outward from the focal point of their shared presence. She allowed herself a slow, deliberate movement, shifting the weight of her stance from one foot to the other, feeling the smooth marble beneath her shoes, the soft rustle of her dress against her legs, the faint brush of air against her arms, all grounding her in the physicality of the hall and reinforcing the awareness of her own agency. The torchlight danced along the tapestries that lined the walls, highlighting centuries of pack history and lore, the golden threads catching the glow in such a way that it seemed to acknowledge the unfolding moment as part of a larger, almost timeless narrative. Lila's gaze swept across the crowd, noting subtle expressions, the quiet adjustment of posture, and the near imperceptible shifts in attention as those who had moments ago jeered now observed with restraint and a dawning recognition of her presence and dignity. Each measured movement she made, the slight lift of her chin, the gentle alignment of her shoulders, the soft placement of her hands at her sides, became a statement, a silent declaration that she had endured, that she had maintained her integrity, and that her resilience was now a force recognized by those around her. Darius took a single, deliberate step forward, the fabric of his long coat swaying slightly with the motion, and Lila felt the subtle shift in energy, the quiet surge of anticipation that accompanied his proximity without a word, a silent affirmation that her fortitude had commanded attention and respect. The murmurs of the pack had diminished to a low, almost reverent hum, each member seemingly attuned to the nuanced exchange of presence and intention between the two central figures. And in that suspended silence, Lila felt the comforting pulse of clarity and assurance flowing through her, reinforcing the inner calm that had been building with every careful step and measured breath. The interplay of light and shadow across the hall seemed to echo the transformation in perception, highlighting both her own resolve and the commanding, supportive presence of Darius, the combination forming a tableau of recognition, quiet authority, and emergent dignity. Lila allowed herself a faint, steadying smile, the awareness of her endurance and composure weaving into a sense of empowerment that was subtle yet potent, anchoring her fully in the moment, connected to the energy of the room, and secure in the acknowledgement she had drawn without a single word spoken. Every detail, the flickering torchlight, the attentive glances, the faint hum of anticipation, the gentle echo of movement across the marble floor, coalesced into a cohesive experience, a shared awareness in which Lila was both central and fully present, her composure and courage radiating outward to shape the atmosphere of the hall. She breathed in the crisp air, steadying herself further, and in that inhalation, felt the full measure of the moment: recognition, respect, and the quiet affirmation of strength earned through perseverance. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. If you believe that kindness is power, hit like and subscribe. These stories remind us, love redeems the broken. Now, back to Lila Monroe. The subtle shift in energy within the grand hall seemed to settle around Lila Monroe like a gentle current. The soft glow of the torches casting dancing light across the polished marble and highlighting the quiet transformation of perception among the pack members. She took a careful step forward, feeling the smooth floor beneath her shoes, the faint coolness grounding her as she navigated the space with deliberate composure. Each movement a measured assertion of presence that contrasted sharply with the earlier tension and ridicule. Her shoulders remained squared, her chin lifted, and her gaze held a steady clarity that radiated confidence, drawing subtle acknowledgments from those who had previously been quick to dismiss her. Darius Blackwell stayed a few feet away, his presence steady and unyielding, his eyes following her with an unspoken awareness, a silent validation of the calm strength she projected in the midst of scrutiny. The murmurs of the crowd had softened into an almost reverent silence, the low hum of curiosity replacing the sharpness of earlier derision, and Lila felt a quiet surge of empowerment as she recognized the subtle shifts in attention around her. The flickering torchlight played across her face, catching the determination in her eyes and illuminating the poised tension of her form, while the shadows created by the uneven light seemed to highlight the contours of the hall itself, amplifying the gravity of the moment and the presence of each individual observing the scene. Every breath she took was deliberate and grounding, each inhalation filling her lungs with crisp, cool air and each exhalation releasing the residual tension that had gripped her from the earlier moments of public scrutiny. Lila could feel the rhythm of the room, the subtle flow of attention moving with her as she navigated the hall, and the faint stir of anticipation among the pack members added a weight of expectation that both challenged and reinforced her inner composure. The soft rustle of fabric and the barely perceptible shuffle of feet against stone formed a gentle symphony around her, each sound accentuating the quiet authority she had begun to embody. Darius shifted slightly, the movement precise and deliberate, reinforcing the connection and the unspoken agreement of support that seemed to bind them within the charged space. Lila noticed the subtle adjustment of the observers, the careful tilts of heads, the slight straightening of backs, and the softening of expressions, all marking a transformation in the collective awareness from judgment to tentative recognition. The hall seemed to respond to this energy, the flickering light capturing the reflective surfaces and casting elongated shadows that moved in harmony with her careful steps and the controlled movements of Darius, creating an atmosphere in which presence, dignity, and quiet strength became the language of acknowledgement. Lila's hands, previously pressed lightly to her sides for grounding, now relaxed further, the faint cool touch of the marble beneath her fingertips serving as a tactile affirmation of stability and awareness. Every measured step, the gentle alignment of her shoulders, and the subtle lift of her chin formed a narrative of resilience that resonated throughout the space, a silent testament to endurance, poise, and composure under observation. The interplay of attention, light, and shadow, combined with the calm, unwavering presence of Darius, elevated the atmosphere into one of respect, anticipation, and quiet validation, allowing Lila to fully inhabit the space and assert her agency without a word. She felt the subtle pull of recognition, the sense that the room itself had shifted to accommodate the strength she projected, and in that moment, each breath and each careful movement reinforced the narrative of calm authority and emerging respect. The hall held a collective awareness that seemed almost tangible, each pack member attuned to the delicate exchange unfolding between her and Darius, every subtle gesture magnified into a shared experience of acknowledgement and emergent dignity. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. If you believe that kindness is power, hit like and subscribe. These stories remind us, love redeems the broken. Now, back to Lila Monroe. The hall was enveloped in a hushed anticipation, the subtle flicker of torchlight dancing across the high, arched windows and casting elongated shadows along the polished marble floors. Lila Monroe moved carefully, each step deliberate, the cool surface beneath her shoes grounding her in the moment as she allowed the quiet strength she had cultivated over the past minutes to guide her movements. The eyes of the pack were fixed upon her, the murmurs that had once filled the space now reduced to a near-silent hum, the collective attention bending around the unspoken exchange of presence and composure that defined the current energy of the room. Darius Blackwell remained poised a few feet ahead, his silver-gray eyes unwavering, scanning her with an intensity that was steady yet quietly affirming, a presence that seemed to imbue the hall with both calm and authority. Lila felt a surge of inner steadiness, the subtle bloom of confidence coursing through her chest as she realized that she had established a rhythm with the space, that each measured movement, each deliberate breath, contributed to the shift in perception around her. The flicker of torchlight highlighted the angles of her face, the subtle determination in her expression, and the controlled lift of her chin, projecting poise and resilience to every observer. She could feel the energy of the room adjusting, the whispers of curiosity threading softly through the silence, as those who had mocked moments before now watched with restraint and keen attention, their expressions reflecting an acknowledgement of the dignity she had maintained. Every breath she drew was deliberate, a rhythm of inhalation and exhalation that grounded her in both the physical and emotional landscape of the hall, a careful balance that reinforced her presence and quiet authority. Darius moved slightly, his steps purposeful but measured, the long coat swaying subtly with the motion, a visual punctuation that underscored the calm command of his presence. Lila instinctively aligned her posture to match the equilibrium he projected, a subtle nod to the connection that had formed between their presences, a tether of recognition that required no words but spoke volumes in the quiet of the hall. The ambient sounds, the soft rustle of fabric, the faint shuffle of feet, the gentle crackle of torch flames, created a nuanced symphony that accentuated the charged stillness, reinforcing the attentive focus of the pack and the emerging equilibrium that had replaced the prior tension. Lila's hands, lightly resting at her sides, were relaxed yet aware, the cool marble beneath her fingertips serving as a tactile anchor as she moved with composed deliberation. Every small gesture, the gentle rise of her shoulders, the careful alignment of her gaze, and the measured placement of her feet formed a silent narrative of resilience, poise, and controlled presence, commanding attention through dignity rather than words. The interplay of light and shadow along the walls, the focused attention of the pack, and the quiet authority of Darius converged into a moment that was both intimate and expansive, a tableau of acknowledgement, anticipation, and emergent respect. Lila allowed herself to absorb the energy, feeling the subtle pulse of recognition in the room, the sense that her endurance, composure, and quiet strength had reshaped the dynamics of the space and drawn the collective focus toward a new understanding. Each breath and subtle movement reinforced her agency, and she sensed the hall responding to the integrity of her posture and the clarity of her presence. The torchlight flickered gently along the tapestry-lined walls, the reflections of polished stone and fabric emphasizing the importance of presence and the unfolding acknowledgement within the room. Lila felt a deep, grounding calm as she continued forward, fully aware of the silent respect she had earned. The tension of prior scrutiny dissolved into a palpable recognition of her poise and quiet fortitude, a moment suspended yet profoundly transformative. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. If you believe that kindness is power, hit like and subscribe. These stories remind us, love redeems the broken. Now, back to Lila Monroe. The atmosphere in the grand hall shifted subtly as Lila Monroe felt a delicate tension settle into the space, a quiet hum of anticipation that seemed to ripple through the observing pack without a single spoken word. Each flicker of torchlight across the high, arched windows and the polished stone floor highlighted the careful movements of the crowd, their gazes fixed upon her as she navigated the space with deliberate composure. Her posture remained poised, shoulders squared and chin lifted, a testament to the quiet strength she had cultivated amidst the scrutiny and earlier discomfort. And she felt the grounding coolness of the marble beneath her feet reinforce the steadiness of her movements. Darius Blackwell's presence a few steps away radiated authority, calm and unwavering, his silver-gray eyes observing her with a focus that seemed to align the energy of the room, lending a sense of reassurance and balance that she could feel subtly influencing her own measured steps. The low murmur of the pack, once sharp with derision, had transformed into an almost reverent attentiveness, a delicate cadence of attention and expectation that followed her with each shift of weight and slight adjustment in posture. Lila inhaled slowly, the crisp air filling her lungs, and with each deliberate exhalation, she released lingering traces of apprehension, allowing a clarity and awareness to anchor her fully in the present moment. The subtle play of shadows along the tapestry-lined walls emphasized her form as she moved, highlighting the controlled grace in the tilt of her shoulders, the careful lift of her chin, and the steady rhythm of her steps, each gesture a quiet declaration of composure and resilience that spoke volumes in the charged silence of the hall. Darius took a measured step forward, his movements deliberate, his presence commanding without force, reinforcing the unspoken understanding that had formed between them, a tether of acknowledgement and shared awareness that made the surrounding space feel more cohesive, more attentive to the emerging narrative of quiet strength. Lila felt a subtle warmth of empowerment bloom in her chest as she recognized the shift in perception around her, the tentative yet unmistakable acknowledgement of her composure and dignity from the pack members who had moments ago dismissed her entirely. The flickering torches captured the contours of her face and the subtle determination reflected in her eyes, enhancing the sense that she had moved from a position of vulnerability to one of quiet command, a presence that influenced the rhythm and energy of the room without the need for a single word. Every soft sound, the shuffle of feet, the rustle of fabric, the faint echo of her breath, contributed to a layered tapestry of attention and anticipation, weaving together the physical space, the presence of Darius, and the subtle assertion of her agency into a coherent moment that commanded focus and respect. Lila allowed herself to breathe in a measured rhythm, each inhalation filling her with grounding awareness and each exhalation releasing tension, reinforcing her presence and the quiet power of resilience she projected. The subtle adjustments of her hands at her sides, the careful alignment of her posture, and the controlled lift of her chin created a narrative of composed strength, a testament to endurance and self-possession that resonated throughout the hall and with the attentive gazes of the pack. The interplay of light, shadow, attention, and stillness elevated the space into a tableau of acknowledgement and quiet authority, where the energy of the room responded to the poise she maintained and the subtle, affirming presence of Darius nearby. Lila felt the weight of recognition, a deepening sense that the moments of tension had transformed into a shared understanding of respect, and that her composure and resilience had become the focal point around which the energy of the hall now centered. Each subtle movement, each careful step, each measured breath strengthened her sense of agency and anchored her in the moment, creating a dynamic interplay of attention and acknowledgement that was palpable and deeply transformative. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. If you believe that kindness is power, hit like and subscribe. These stories remind us, love redeems the broken. Now, back to Lila Monroe. The hall seemed to breathe with a life of its own, every flicker of torchlight illuminating the subtle contours of Lila Monroe's determined expression as she moved deliberately across the polished marble floor. Each step was measured, a careful balance between the weight of observation and the assertion of quiet authority, and with every motion, she felt the undercurrent of attention settle around her. The previously restless murmurs now softened into a collective anticipation that stretched through the high-arched windows and vaulted ceiling. Darius Blackwell remained poised a few paces ahead, his silver-gray eyes steady, calm, and unwavering, a presence that anchored the energy of the room and lent a sense of security and recognition to her careful steps. The warmth of the torchlight caught the angles of his face and reflected off the polished surfaces of the hall, creating a visual rhythm that mirrored the steady cadence of her breath and the deliberate pace of her movements. Lila felt the cool marble beneath her shoes, the gentle rustle of her dress as it shifted with her posture, and the faint, grounding pressure of the floor through the soles of her feet, each sensory detail contributing to a profound awareness of her own composure and resilience. The subtle hum of the observers had transformed into an attentive quiet, the once sharp and judgmental glances now tempered by curiosity and tentative respect, and Lila sensed a ripple of acknowledgement flowing through the crowd, a recognition of the dignity she maintained in every gesture, every measured breath. She allowed her eyes to sweep across the hall, noting the slight inclination of heads, the tentative adjustments of posture, and the careful attention that now followed her movements, each detail reinforcing the quiet authority she had cultivated through perseverance. The interplay of light and shadow from the flickering torches highlighted her form and the controlled lines of her posture, the subtle lift of her chin, the steady alignment of her shoulders, and the graceful positioning of her hands, all projecting a calm resilience that resonated across the space. Darius took a single deliberate step forward, the motion precise and fluid, conveying reassurance and subtle acknowledgement without a word, and Lila felt a tether of connection, a silent understanding that reinforced the emerging equilibrium between them and the attentive energy of the hall. Every inhale she drew filled her lungs with crisp, cool air, steadying her heartbeat and reinforcing the measured control she held over her movements, while each exhale carried away residual tension, leaving her calm, present, and fully aware of the space and attention surrounding her. The soft rustle of fabric, the faint echo of steps on the stone, and the gentle crackle of torch flames became part of the ambient rhythm, reinforcing the focus of the observers on the silent narrative unfolding between her and Darius. Lila's subtle gestures, the careful shift of weight, the alignment of her shoulders, the poised lift of her chin, and the relaxed positioning of her hands, formed a visual language of composure and resilience, commanding attention and respect without a single uttered word. The hall itself seemed to bend around this quiet authority, the energy of the space responding to the steady presence of Darius and the calm assertion of her own agency, creating a tableau of acknowledgement, anticipation, and emergent respect. She felt the collective weight of observation transform into a gentle current that reinforced her confidence, the sense that endurance, composure, and quiet strength could shape perception and influence the atmosphere in profound and subtle ways. Every breath, every movement, every focused glance anchored her fully in the moment, and Lila realized the significance of the space she now commanded, a silent affirmation of resilience, poise, and the quiet assertion of her presence that radiated across the hall and into the attentive awareness of all those who observed. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. If you believe that kindness is power, hit like and subscribe. These stories remind us, love redeems the broken. Now, back to Lila Monroe. The hall seemed to exhale with a collective awareness as Lila Monroe allowed herself to pause for a moment, taking in the transformation of the space around her. The torchlight flickered gently across the vaulted ceiling, casting warm reflections onto the polished marble floor, illuminating the attentive faces of the pack who now watched with quiet reverence rather than derision. Lila felt the cool floor beneath her feet, grounding her in the reality of the moment, while the subtle rustle of her dress as she shifted her weight echoed softly in the otherwise hushed room. Darius Blackwell remained a few steps ahead, his silver-gray eyes steady and calm, observing her with an intensity that spoke of recognition and quiet admiration, his presence alone shifting the energy of the hall toward equilibrium and respect. The murmurs that had once punctuated the air had diminished to soft, tentative whispers, each observer adjusting their posture, tilting their heads slightly, and redirecting their attention in acknowledgement of the dignity Lila now projected. She breathed in slowly, the crisp air of the hall filling her lungs, steadying the rhythm of her heartbeat, and with each measured exhale, she released any lingering tension, embracing the clarity and confidence that had grown steadily through the series of moments since the initial scrutiny. Her shoulders remained square, her chin lifted, and her hands rested lightly at her sides, the subtle alignment of her form conveying a poised authority that had not required a single word to assert. The soft flicker of torchlight highlighted the contours of her face and the subtle intensity in her eyes, amplifying the quiet command she radiated, while the shadows played along the walls, creating an atmosphere of focus, anticipation, and emergent acknowledgement. Every step she took was deliberate, measured, and intentional, the smooth marble floor beneath her shoes providing a constant tactile reminder of presence, stability, and agency. Darius took a slow, purposeful step closer, the long coat flowing subtly with the motion, reinforcing the rhythm and cohesion between them, and Lila felt the quiet reassurance and connection in the unspoken communication that passed between their presences. The gentle hum of the pack, the soft echo of movement, and the flickering light combined to form a tableau of suspended energy, a moment that was both intimate and expansive, where the focus of the room had shifted entirely to recognize resilience, composure, and the emerging narrative of quiet authority. Lila allowed herself to observe the subtle shifts of the observers around her, the tentative adjustments of posture, the careful placement of hands, the cautious inclination of heads, and she understood that her endurance and poise had created a ripple effect, transforming the collective awareness into one of respect and tentative admiration. Every small gesture, the alignment of her shoulders, the steady lift of her chin, the controlled shift of weight, formed a narrative of calm strength, influencing the room as much through presence as through movement. The torchlight reflected off the polished surfaces, emphasizing the interplay of shadow and illumination, reinforcing the focus on her figure and the quiet acknowledgement of the observers. She felt a deep, grounding calm flow through her, the realization that her composure had altered the dynamics of the hall settling firmly in her chest, and with each careful step and measured breath, she affirmed her agency and the emergent respect around her. Lila's awareness extended to every subtle sound, every movement, every flicker of light, each element contributing to a sense of transformation in the atmosphere, a silent understanding that her resilience and dignity had become central to the unfolding narrative. The hall had shifted from a space of scrutiny and tension into one of attentive acknowledgement, and in this suspended yet profound moment, Lila felt fully present, fully recognized, and fully assured in her ability to influence the energy of the room with nothing more than her composure, grace, and quiet strength. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. If you believe that kindness is power, hit like and subscribe. These stories remind us, love redeems the broken. Now, back to Lila Monroe. The hall seemed to hold its breath as the moment reached its quiet crescendo, the flickering torchlight casting intricate shadows across the polished marble floor and illuminating the attentive faces of the pack, who now watched with a reverent focus. Lila Monroe felt the subtle weight of recognition settle around her like a gentle current, every gaze in the room reflecting a collective acknowledgement of the composure, poise, and quiet strength she had cultivated through the unfolding moments. Each step she took was deliberate, grounded by the cool marble beneath her shoes and the gentle rustle of her dress as it shifted with her movements, creating a rhythm that mirrored the steady cadence of her breath and the controlled beat of her heartbeat. Darius Blackwell remained just a few paces ahead, his silver-gray eyes unwavering, conveying a calm authority that seemed to anchor the entire space, lending a subtle reassurance that extended through the hall and infused the moment with an unspoken sense of alignment and respect. The ambient hum of observation, previously filled with whispers of derision, had transformed into a soft, measured attentiveness. Every subtle movement of the observers, an inclination of the head, a shift of weight, a quiet adjustment of posture, reflecting the emerging narrative of acknowledgement and admiration for the poise Lila had sustained. She drew a slow, steadying breath, feeling the crisp air of the hall fill her lungs and settle her senses, each exhale releasing remnants of tension and fear, leaving a quiet, resolute awareness of presence and agency. Her shoulders remained squared, her chin lifted, and her hands rested lightly at her sides, the subtle alignment of her form projecting a calm, steady authority that radiated through the hall without a word. The interplay of torchlight and shadow accentuated the angles of her face, the depth in her eyes, and the graceful movement of her posture, creating an unspoken declaration of resilience and composure that resonated throughout the room. Each sound, the soft echo of fabric brushing marble, the faint shuffle of feet, the gentle crackle of flames, formed part of a subtle symphony of attention, emphasizing the importance of her presence and the careful equilibrium between movement and stillness. Darius took a deliberate step forward, the motion smooth and purposeful, reinforcing the silent tether between them, an unspoken understanding of support and shared acknowledgement that guided the energy of the space. Lila felt the warmth of confidence rising within her, a quiet affirmation that the endurance, dignity, and calm she had maintained had fundamentally altered the perception of the observers and shaped the atmosphere of the hall. The soft shifts of the pack members, their cautious glances, and attentive posture reflected the transformation, a collective acknowledgement of her quiet authority and the presence of Darius that lent the moment an air of profound significance. Every subtle gesture, the precise alignment of her shoulders, the measured lift of her chin, the gentle positioning of her hands, formed a language of resilience and calm influence, asserting a presence that required no spoken word to command attention and respect. The light danced over the polished stone and the detailed tapestries lining the hall,